At 8:47 on a Monday morning, my mother handed my sister the board packet with my name still printed on the cover. Then she looked directly at me and said, "You can wait outside, Elise. This meeting is for people who know how to protect the family." My sister Marin did not even look embarrassed. She slid into my chair at the long walnut table, smoothed her cream-colored blazer, and placed both hands over the folder I had spent 3 nights preparing. I stood there with my coffee still warm in my hand, staring at the place card that read, Elise, Heart Founder and Operations Director. My mother turned it face down. I was 34 years old and I had spent the last 11 years building Heart and Vale home goods from a rented warehouse with one leaking ceiling fan, 3 borrowed folding tables, and a product idea everyone in my family had laughed at until it started making money. By then we had retail accounts in 4 states, a distribution center outside Raleigh, and enough employees that I knew their children's names, their favorite coffee orders, and which ones would pretend they were fine when they were not. But in my mother's version of the story, I had never built anything. I had simply helped out. The conference room on the 3rd floor had always made me uncomfortable. It was designed after the company became successful, after the money came in, after the photographs in the lobby started showing my mother cutting ribbons and shaking hands with people who had never seen her unload boxes at 2 in the morning. The walls were glass. The table was polished. The city skyline filled the windows like a promise meant for someone else. I had once loved that room. That morning it felt like a courtroom where I had already been declared guilty. Marin crossed one leg over the other and opened my presentation. "Don't make this dramatic," she said quietly. "Mom just thinks I'm better at investor-facing conversations." I looked at her. She was 31, beautiful in the way that made strangers assume she had never had a difficult day in her life. Her hair was perfect. Her lipstick was soft and expensive. She had joined the company 2 years earlier after leaving a marketing job in Chicago, and within 6 months my mother had given her a vice president title, a corner office, and a salary bigger than what I had paid myself during the first 4 years of the business. She had never stayed late to fix a supplier mistake. She had never driven through a storm to deliver inventory when our carrier went bankrupt. She had never sat in a parking lot crying because a bank officer told her a woman in her 20s, with no collateral, should find a husband with better credit. But she knew how to smile in photographs. My mother Diane had always mistaken that for leadership. "This isn't personal," Mom said, pulling the board packet closer to Marin. "We need to present confidence today. The new investor is taking a serious risk on us." I almost laughed. The new investor was not taking a risk on us. He was reviewing a possible partnership, a strategic investment. The kind that could expand Heart and Vale into national distribution without selling the company outright. The kind of deal I had spent 14 months preparing for, because I understood our margins, our production limits, our supply chain, and every quiet weakness buried inside our growth reports. My mother understood one thing: appearances. And Marin was her favorite appearance. I set my coffee down on the side credenza because my hand had started shaking. Not enough for them to notice, not enough to give either of them the satisfaction, but enough that I had to press my palm flat against the wood and breathe through the old familiar feeling. It was the feeling of being 12 years old again, standing in our kitchen, while Mom told relatives that Marin was the social one and I was the difficult one. The feeling of being 16 when I won a statewide business competition and Mom missed the ceremony because Marin had a dance rehearsal. The feeling of being 23 when Dad died suddenly and left behind a struggling hardware store, a stack of overdue invoices, and a family that looked at me as if I was supposed to save all of them without ever asking to be thanked. Dad had named the store Heart and Vale, after my grandmother Vera Vale Hart. It had been a neighborhood place in Durham where people bought paint cabinet pulls, tools, and whatever else they needed to fix the parts of their homes that were falling apart. It had survived for nearly 40 years, mostly because Dad knew everyone who walked through the door. But Dad had been good at people and terrible at planning. When he died, the business had 6 weeks of cash left. Mom wanted to sell. Marin wanted to move back to Chicago. And I had stood in Dad's cramped office with a yellow legal pad in my lap, staring at the old supplier invoices and realizing something no one else had noticed. The home goods products that sold fastest were not the hardware. They were the simple, affordable things people bought when they wanted their homes to feel better: kitchen organizers, entryway hooks, storage baskets, porch lanterns, small pieces that made a place feel cared for. Dad's store did not need to die. It needed to change. I had been 23, grieving, terrified, and angry enough to try. Mom later told people she had supported my vision. The truth was, she had given me access to Dad's old account and told me not to embarrass the family. I did not blame her for being afraid then. I was afraid too. What I blamed her for was everything that came after. I built the first product line from sketches on the back of invoices. I found a small manufacturer in Tennessee willing to take a chance on a tiny order. I called local boutiques myself. I packed shipments with my aunt's retired neighbor. I learned accounting from free community college workshops and learned sales by getting rejected so many times that rejection stopped feeling personal. For the first year, Mom handled payroll because she had worked in banking before she married Dad. That was useful. I appreciated it. I said thank you every time. But somewhere along the way, she started telling people she had stepped in to save the company. By the time we opened our second warehouse, she had turned that sentence into a family fact. Marin returned when success looked easier. She called it coming home. I called it arriving after the roof was built. Please leave the room, Mom said again, more sharply now. You're making your sister uncomfortable. I looked down at the board packet in front of Marin. It contained my projections, my supplier analysis, my expansion model, and a handwritten note clipped to the front page reminding me to ask the investor about employee retention protections. I had written it at 1 a.m. because I knew exactly what happened when companies grew too fast and forgot the people who made them work. Marin picked up the note and read it. Then she smiled. You always overcomplicate things, she said. That sentence landed harder than it should have. Because it was not hers. It was Mom's. She had said it to me when I asked why my name had disappeared from the company website's history page. She had said it when I asked why Marin had been introduced as the next generation of Heart and Veil leadership at a Chamber of Commerce dinner. She had said it when I suggested the board should vote on executive titles instead of letting family members hand them out at Sunday brunch. You always overcomplicate things, Elise. What she meant was, stop asking people to admit what they did. The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. The new investor, Adrian Keller, was expected at 9:15. He was the founder of Keller Retail Group, a private investment firm known for buying into regional companies and scaling them carefully. He had a reputation for being exacting, private, and difficult to impress. He had visited our distribution center twice without warning. He had asked questions no one else thought to ask. Why are your warehouse supervisors staying longer than their shifts? Why does your returns rate drop in stores where Elise Hart trains the managers herself? Why does every employee I speak with call her when something goes wrong? The first time he asked that last question, Mom had laughed and said I was very hands-on. The second time, Marin answered before I could. She has trouble letting go, she said. Adrian Keller had looked at me for a long moment after that. Not with pity. With attention. That should have warned them. Instead, it only made Mom more determined to control the room. She walked toward me now, lowering her voice so Marin could pretend she was not listening. You need to understand something. This company cannot keep looking like a grief project you started after your father died. For a second, I could not speak. The room went quiet around us. Even Marin looked up. Mom's expression did not change. She was calm, measured, almost maternal. That was what made her cruelest moments so hard to explain to other people. She never yelled. She never threw things. She never said anything ugly enough for strangers to call it abuse. She simply took the worst thing that had ever happened to you and used it as evidence that you were unstable. I didn't start this because of grief, I said. Mom folded her arms. You started it because you were scared. There is a difference. No, I said, my voice steadier now. I started it because Dad deserved better than having his work erased. Her jaw tightened. For the first time that morning, I saw the fear underneath her anger. Not fear of losing money. Fear of losing the story. The story where she was the widow who held the family together. The story where Marin was the polished daughter who saved the company from my emotional decisions. The story where I was useful, loyal, hardworking, but never important enough to be seen as the person who created what they now claimed. Mom stepped closer. Your father would not want you tearing this family apart over a chair. I looked at the empty chair with my name on it. Then I looked at my sister sitting in it. It was never about the chair, I said. Mom's eyes narrowed. I picked up my coffee. It was about the fact that you thought you could take it. She walked away before I could say more, returning to the head of the table just as the first board member entered. I watched Marin straighten the papers and practice the same composed smile she used in magazine photos. She did not look at me again. Maybe she knew she had taken something that did not belong to her. Maybe she had convinced herself she deserved it. In our family, those had always been treated as the same thing. I left the conference room because I refused to stand there waiting to be pushed out by security or pity. I walked past the lobby display where a framed photo showed my mother at the company's 10-year anniversary celebration. Marin stood beside her holding a champagne glass. Behind them, almost hidden near the edge of the picture, was me. I was carrying a box of product samples. Outside, the morning air was cold enough to wake me fully. I stood on the front steps of Heart and Vale headquarters, looking through the glass doors at the building I had helped turn from an old hardware store into a company with 180 employees. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Keller is here early. He asked for you first." I read it twice. Then, the front doors opened behind me. A man in a dark gray coat stepped onto the sidewalk, followed by our receptionist, who looked pale and confused. Adrian Keller scanned the lobby, then the parking lot, then finally found me standing outside beneath the brushed metal sign that carried my father's name. He stopped. His eyes moved past me to the glass conference room where my mother and sister were waiting around the table. Then he looked back at me. "Miss Hart," he said. I nodded once. He glanced toward the boardroom again, and his voice carried just far enough for the people inside to hear. "Why," he asked, "is the real founder standing outside?" Adrian Keller did not raise his voice when he asked it. He did not need to. The question traveled through the glass doors and settled over the conference room with the weight of something official. I saw my mother freeze at the head of the table. Marin's hand stopped halfway to the folder. For one long second nobody moved. Then Mom pushed open the door with a smile so polished it almost looked painful. "Mr. Keller," she said, "Elise was just stepping out for a moment. We were about to begin." Adrian looked at her, then at me. I was under the impression she was leading the presentation. Mom's smile tightened. She helped build the company in its earlier stage. Marin is taking on more of the executive role now. It is a natural transition. I had heard my mother use that phrase before. Natural transition. She said it when she moved my office to the smaller wing without warning me. She said it when Marin's name appeared beside mine in the annual report, then above mine the next year. She said it whenever she made theft sound like a family decision. Adrian did not nod. He simply turned toward the building and held the door open for me. Then perhaps he said, "We should begin with everyone who helped build it." I walked in before I could change my mind. The boardroom had never looked smaller. The glass walls made every face visible from the hallway, and several department heads had already gathered outside, pretending to adjust their schedules or check their phones. They knew something was wrong. Companies always know when the people at the top are lying. It moves through a building faster than any memo. My chair was still occupied. Marin looked at me as I approached. "Elise," she said softly, "don't make this worse." That was when something inside me went quiet. Not healed, not forgiven, quiet. I placed my hand on the back of the chair and looked directly at her. "You are sitting in my seat." Her cheeks flushed. "Mom asked me to." "I know." For a second I thought she might refuse. Then Adrian Keller pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. He opened a thin black notebook, set a silver pen beside it and said, "I would prefer that the person who prepared the operating forecast sit where she is comfortable." Marin moved. She did not apologize. She gathered the presentation folder and slid into a chair beside my mother, but she moved. I sat down slowly, feeling the old wood beneath my hands. It was ridiculous that a chair could matter so much. But that chair had held me through every early meeting, every bad quarter, every supplier crisis, every decision that had made the company stronger, while my family took photographs with the finished result. Mom leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Do not embarrass us." I turned toward her. "You already did that." The meeting began with numbers, because numbers are safer than feelings. Revenue growth, retail expansion, manufacturing capacity, employee retention. I spoke carefully, not because I wanted to impress Adrian, but because I knew every detail was true. I explained the cost of opening a second distribution route through Richmond. I explained why our new warehouse software had reduced lost inventory by 12%. I explained why our best performing stores were the ones where managers had the freedom to adjust local product displays. Marin followed along in the packet, occasionally adding words like brand positioning and customer confidence. She sounded smooth, she sounded prepared. But she did not know the company. Not really. When Adrian asked why our return rate had dropped in North Carolina but risen in Georgia, she looked at me. When he asked which supplier had caused the late shipment in January, she looked at me again. When he asked who had negotiated the warehouse lease extension without raising our fixed costs, Mom answered before I could. That was a team effort. Adrian wrote something down. Then he asked who was the lead negotiator. Mom smiled. Elise has always been very involved. It was a compliment shaped like a cage. I answered anyway. I was. The room went silent for a moment. Adrian nodded. Thank you. That was all. 2 words. But no one in my family had said them to me about work in years. The meeting continued for almost an hour. Adrian asked questions with the patience of someone who had already done his homework. He knew our first product line had been called Home Hold. He knew the original warehouse had been rented under a personal guarantee. He knew the first retailer who carried us had been a small boutique in Chapel Hill called Juniper and Reed. Finally, he turned a page in his notebook. In my due diligence review, he said, I found several early contracts signed by Elise Hart as founder and managing director. I also reviewed the original business plan submitted to the local development fund. It was her work. Mom's fingers tightened around her water glass. Adrian continued. Yet, the recent investor materials refer to Diane Hart as the founder and Marin Hart as the primary architect of the company's growth. Can someone explain that discrepancy? My mother did not look surprised. She looked offended. The company has evolved, she said. Families evolve, titles evolve. Elise has been important, of course, but we all made sacrifices. There it was. Sacrifices. The word she used whenever she wanted credit for surviving something I had carried. Marin leaned forward. Mom is right. Elise started with the old store, but the business we have now is different. We had to modernize it. We had to make it investor ready. I looked at my sister. She spoke with such certainty that I almost admired it. Not because she was right. Because she had learned how to stand inside a lie without flinching. You mean you had to make it look like it belonged to you, I said. Mom's head snapped toward me. Elise. No, I said. You wanted honesty. Let's use it. The board members shifted in their seats. One of them, Mr. Bradford, had known my father. He was in his 70s, now quiet and careful with hands that always trembled slightly when he held papers. He had been there when I first proposed changing the store. He had watched Mom dismiss me as emotional and inexperienced. He looked down at the table. That hurt more than I expected. Because silence had always been my family's strongest weapon. Not the insults, not the exclusion. The silence of people who knew better and decided comfort mattered more than truth. Mom spoke again, lower this time. You are confusing being hurt with being wrong. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Then I opened the presentation folder. The first page was still mine. A copy of the original business plan dated 11 years earlier. My name appeared at the bottom in black ink. Under it was a sentence I had written at 23, when I still believed people would recognize effort if you made it visible enough. Heart and veil will grow by making every home feel like someone cares who lives there. I had forgotten that line. Marin had not. Someone had highlighted it in pale yellow. I am not confused, I said. I know exactly what I built. Mom's face changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. She had expected me to cry. That was the role she had prepared for. The difficult daughter. The emotional daughter. The daughter who could be dismissed because her voice shook when she told the truth. Instead, I placed the folder in the center of the table. The company did evolve, I said. It evolved because I worked for it to evolve. Mom handled payroll in the beginning. She helped keep the lights on. Marin later improved our branding and helped with media. Those things are true. I paused. But neither of them gets to erase the part where I built the foundation they are standing on. Adrian Keller closed his notebook. I appreciate the clarity, he said. Mom looked toward him, searching for an opening. Mr. Keller, family dynamics can become emotional. We are trying to establish a clean leadership structure before moving forward. A clean structure is exactly what I require, he said. His tone did not change. That made it worse. I do not invest in companies where the operating reality and the presented leadership structure are different. Especially when the difference appears to be based on internal family pressure. Marin sat straighter. I am fully qualified to represent this company. Adrian looked at her. You may be. Her face softened with relief. Then he added, but qualification is not the same as authorship. No one spoke. I could hear the HVAC system humming above us. I could hear someone in the hallway drop a pen. I could hear my own breathing slow and controlled, like I had practiced through every difficult conversation my mother had ever cornered me into having. Adrian turned back to me. Miss Hart, he said, were you aware that this board meeting was being presented as part of a leadership transition? I looked at my mother first. She stared at the far wall. Then I looked at Marin. She was watching me now, not with confidence, but with something sharper. Calculation. She was trying to decide how much I knew. I was not, I said. Adrian nodded once, as if he had expected that answer. Then I need to pause this process. Mom's chair scraped against the floor. Pause it. Yes. For how long? Until I understand who has the authority to make decisions here, who is responsible for the company's operational performance, and whether the board materials accurately reflect the ownership and leadership structure. Mom's voice became strained. Our records are accurate. Adrian looked at the folder in front of me. Then I am sure providing them will be simple. That was when my mother made her first mistake. She looked at Marin. Not at the board, not at Adrian, not at me. At Marin. It was only a glance, less than a second, but it told me there were records they did not want discussed. Something had been happening behind my back. Something bigger than a chair. The meeting ended 10 minutes later, but the damage had already been done. Adrian left with a request for original company documents, governance records, early contracts, executive agreements, and a complete ownership history. He asked that the files be sent directly to his legal and financial team, not filtered through family review. Mom nodded as if she agreed. But her face had gone pale. The moment Adrian stepped into the hallway, she turned on me. What did you tell him? She hissed. Nothing. You must have said something. He came in looking for you. I didn't ask him to. You always do this, she said. You make people think you are the victim. Marin stood beside her, quiet now. Her perfect confidence had faded, but she still held my folder against her chest like it belonged to her. Mom stepped closer. This company needs to move forward. We cannot have you clinging to the past because you need everyone to keep praising you. That almost made me laugh. I had spent 11 years doing the work without praise. I don't need praise, I said. I need you to stop lying. Her expression hardened. Watch your tone. No. The word came out clean. Simple. It landed between us like something I should have said years ago. Marin finally spoke. Mom was trying to protect the company. Investors do not want to see a family business built around one person. I looked at her. Then why was I left outside? She did not answer. Because there was no answer that did not reveal the truth. They did not want to protect the company from me. They wanted to protect themselves from what I represented. Mom walked away, first heels striking the floor with quick, angry steps. Marin followed her, but before she left, she turned back. You should have just let this go, she said. I watched her disappear down the hallway. Then I returned to my office. The room was smaller than it used to be. They had moved me from the executive floor 6 months earlier and told me the old space was needed for client-facing leadership. My office now overlooked the loading dock instead of the city. I had tried not to let it bother me. The loading dock was honest at least. Things arrived. Things left. No one pretended the work happened somewhere else. I sat behind my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a locked metal file box my father had given me years ago. It was dented on one corner and scratched along the lid. I had kept it because Dad kept everything important in it: old contracts, store receipts, handwritten notes, the original Heart and Veil logo sketched on graph paper. After he died, Mom told me it was clutter. I never threw it away. My hands were steady when I opened it. Inside were the original incorporation documents for Hart and Vale Home Goods, the first supplier agreement, my original local development grant application, the bank guarantee I signed when no one else would, a faded photograph of me standing outside the first warehouse holding a clipboard in one hand and a roll of packing tape in the other. And beneath all of it was something I had not looked at in years. A signed shareholder agreement dated 3 years after Dad died. My name was listed as the majority voting owner. Mom had signed it. Marin had signed it too. I read the final paragraph twice. Then my phone rang. It was our corporate controller, Rebecca Lynn. Her voice was low. "Elise, I think you need to come downstairs." "Why?" There was a pause. Then she said, "Your mother just asked me to pull the ownership transfer files from last year. And Marin is asking whether you still keep copies of the original founder documents." I looked down at the metal box on my desk. For the first time that day, I understood why they were afraid. They had not only taken my seat, they had been trying to take the company. I did not go downstairs right away. I locked the metal file box, slipped it into my work tote, and sat very still behind my desk until the shaking in my hands stopped. Outside my window, a delivery truck backed into the loading bay, with a slow, familiar beep. Someone shouted for a pallet jack. Forklifts moved inventory from one end of the warehouse to the other. The company was still running. People were still doing their jobs. And somewhere upstairs, my mother and sister were trying to decide how to take control of something they had never truly built. Rebecca met me near the finance office with the door half closed behind her. She was usually composed, the kind of person who could deliver bad news about cash flow without making anyone panic. That morning her face was too tight around the eyes. She had worked for Hart and Vale for 7 years. She had seen enough to understand which family arguments were harmless and which ones could become dangerous. "Your mom asked for the transfer documents," she said. "Not the board copies, the originals." "Which transfer documents?" Rebecca hesitated. "The ones from last summer. The documents that moved part of your voting rights into the family holding company." For a second I honestly thought she had misspoken. "I never transferred voting rights." "I know." The air in the hallway seemed to narrow around me. I could smell coffee from the break room. I could hear someone laughing too loudly behind a nearby cubicle wall. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary morning. But suddenly every ordinary thing felt insulting. "What exactly did she ask you for?" I said. Rebecca glanced toward the open hallway. "She asked whether the signed originals were still in the archive cabinet. Then Marin asked whether you had ever signed anything electronically from your home address. She mentioned your old laptop." My stomach dropped. Last summer, my mother had come to my apartment with dinner and a bottle of wine. She said she wanted to discuss cleaning up family paperwork before the next round of growth. I remembered signing several documents at the kitchen table after a long day at the warehouse. She had pointed to tabs. She had said our outside counsel had already reviewed everything. I had trusted her because she was my mother. I had not read every line. That was the part that hurt most. Not that they had tried to deceive me. That they had counted on love to make me careless. "Did you see the documents?" I asked. Rebecca nodded slowly. "I saw copies. I questioned them at the time because the ownership percentages did not match the prior cap table. Your mom said it was a temporary internal restructuring. She told me you had approved it." "And you believed her?" Her expression tightened. "I believed that if you had not approved it, you would have said something." That answer stung because it was fair. I had spent years keeping peace by not asking enough questions. I had assumed that if I worked harder, if I stayed useful, if I did not make every wound into a battle, eventually my mother would stop treating me like an obstacle. Instead, she learned that silence was the easiest thing to steal from me. Rebecca opened a drawer and took out a thin gray folder. "I made copies when I first saw the documents. I did not know why. Something about them felt wrong. The signatures looked like yours, but the dates did not line up with the board minutes." I took the folder from her. Inside were copies of the documents my mother had described as routine. There was an amended shareholder agreement, a consent form, a voting proxy, and on the final page a transfer clause written in dense legal language that assigned a portion of my voting control to Hart Family Holdings LLC. The company my mother controlled. My signature was there. But the date beside it was July 18. I had been in Atlanta that day dealing with a supplier dispute. I remembered because my flight home had been delayed 6 hours, and I had spent the evening in an airport hotel with my laptop open beside a vending machine. I could not have signed anything in my apartment. I looked up at Rebecca. Do you have the original email chain? I do. Send it to me, everything. The board minutes, the file revisions, the internal notes. Do not tell anyone. Her mouth pressed into a line. Elise, this could become serious. It already is. She nodded, then lowered her voice. There is one more thing. The documents were prepared by an attorney your mother hired directly, not our regular counsel. That did not surprise me. It should have. But it did not. By lunchtime, I had 3 files open on my computer and a headache that felt like a tight band around my skull. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Mom had not attempted one dramatic theft. She had built a slow, quiet path around me. First, she changed executive titles. Then she reduced my access to certain financial reports. Then she moved my office. Then she began presenting Marin as the company's future. Finally, she created paperwork that could make the shift look legitimate. It was not impulsive. It was planned. And Marin had known. Her signature appeared on the witness page. I stared at it for a long time. My sister's handwriting had always been neat. Rounded letters, controlled spacing. Even when we were kids, she wrote her name like she expected it to be printed somewhere important. I remembered teaching her how to sign checks when she was 16. I remembered helping her prepare for college interviews. I remembered sending her money in Chicago when she called crying because she had fallen behind on rent but did not want Mom to know. She had taken that help so easily. Then she signed her name beneath a lie. At 1:12 p.m., Marin came to my office. She did not knock. She never knocked when she wanted to pretend she still had a right to enter any room I was in. She stepped inside wearing the same cream blazer, though now the sleeves were rolled to her elbows and a strand of hair had come loose near her cheek. For the first time all day, she looked less polished. You are making this bigger than it is, she said. I did not look up from the document in front of me. That seems to be the family sentence of the day. She shut the door behind her. Mom is scared. The investor meeting went badly. Everyone is calling her. The board wants answers. They should. Marin, I said, finally, looking at her. Did you know about the transfer? Her face changed. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me. She walked toward the chair across from my desk and sat down without being invited. It was not a transfer. It moved my voting rights. It was a temporary structure. It was dated on a day I was not even in the state. She looked away. That was all the answer I needed. I felt something inside me close. Not break. Close. Like a door I had spent years holding open for someone who kept kicking it. You knew, I said. Marin rubbed her hands together once quickly. Mom said you would never agree because you do not understand how people see you. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. How people see me. She said investors see you as too attached, too emotional, too close to the old version of the company. The old version? I asked. You mean the version that paid for everything you are sitting in? She flinched. Then she did something I had expected from Mom, not from her. She leaned forward and softened her voice. You have to admit you are hard to work with sometimes. You keep score, you hold on to things, you make every decision about what Dad wanted. The room went silent. I looked at my sister's face and saw how thoroughly my mother had trained her. Not to lie in a wild, obvious way. To borrow language that sounded reasonable. To turn someone else's sacrifice into evidence of their instability. You think I keep score, I said. Marin swallowed. I opened the metal file box on my desk and took out the original shareholder agreement. The paper was old enough that the edges had softened. I placed it between us. Read the last page. She did not move. Marin, read it. Slowly, she pulled it closer. Her eyes moved across the paragraph. I watched the exact moment she understood. The agreement gave me majority voting control. It also stated that any transfer of my voting rights required my physical signature witnessed by independent counsel and recorded in the formal board minutes. None of that had happened. Her face went pale. Mom said this was replaced, she whispered. It was never replaced. She said you signed an amendment. I signed papers, I trusted her to explain honestly. Marin looked up at me, and for the first time in years I saw something real in her expression. Fear. Not fear for me. Fear for herself. What are you going to do? She asked. I closed the file box. I do not know yet. That was true. I did not know whether I wanted to burn everything down or walk away from all of them. I did not know whether I wanted to call a lawyer, call the board, call Adrian Keller, or simply pack my desk and disappear from the building that had started to feel like a trap. But I knew one thing. I was done letting them decide what I could survive. Marin stood slowly. Mom will say she did it to protect the company. She can say whatever she wants. She will say you are punishing her. No, I said. I am protecting myself. That sentence seemed to hit her harder than anything else I had said. Because in our family, protecting yourself had always been treated as betrayal. She left without another word. At 4 o'clock, I received an email from Adrian Keller's chief of staff. It was brief and formal. Keller Retail Group had paused all conversations pending receipt of governance documents. They requested a direct call with the majority voting owner of Hart and Vale Home Goods. The email did not name me. It did not need to. I read it 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Rebecca and asked her to confirm the current legal cap table from the earliest available records. 10 minutes later, she came into my office with her laptop. Elise, she said, I need you to see this. She turned the screen toward me. The original cap table listed me as controlling 51% of voting shares. Mom had 30%. Marin had 19%. The later document reduced me to 29%, elevated Mom to 46%, and shifted Marin to 25%. But the amended records had never been properly filed with the state. They existed inside the company's internal folder. Nowhere else. The transfer was not just suspicious. It was incomplete. Maybe invalid. Rebecca looked at me carefully. You should speak to independent counsel. I nodded. My father had a lawyer, I said quietly. A woman named Miriam Cole. She handled the original incorporation. Rebecca blinked. Is she still practicing? I do not know. But I found out. Miriam Cole was 72 years old, still working 3 days a week from a small office above a bookstore in downtown Durham. When I called, her assistant asked whether it was about Hart and Vale. I hesitated for half a second before saying yes. There was a silence. Then the assistant said Miss Cole has been expecting someone from that company to call eventually. That sentence sat heavily in my chest. Miriam herself answered 15 minutes later. Her voice was warm, direct, and older than I remembered. Elise, she said, I was wondering when you would finally get tired of being polite. I closed my office door and sat down. Did my father tell you something? I asked. He told me a great many things, she said. But before we talk, I need you to bring me the metal box he gave you, especially anything with his handwriting on it. I looked down at the box beside my desk. A memory surfaced so suddenly that I had to close my eyes. Dad in his office months before he died, handing me the box and saying, You are the one who notices what people skip over. Keep the things that matter. At the time I thought he meant invoices. Now I was no longer sure. I left the office at 6:30 after everyone else had gone. The halls were dark. The lobby lights had switched to their evening setting, casting a soft glow over the framed photographs of our company history. I stopped in front of the 10-year anniversary photo again. Mom in the center. Marin smiling beside her. Me, at the edge, carrying a box. For years that picture had made me feel invisible. That night it made me see something else. I had been the one holding the product. The proof. The weight of what was real. As I stepped outside, my phone rang. Mom. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Her voice was calm, which meant she was furious. We are having dinner tomorrow night, she said. At the house. Your sister will be there. The board chair will be there too. Why? Because we are family, Elise. And family handles things privately. I looked back through the glass doors at the building with my father's name above it. No, I said. Family is why you thought you could do this privately. Her breathing changed. Then she said the words I knew she had been saving. If you force this into the open, you will destroy everything your father built. I held the phone tighter. For 11 years that sentence would have stopped me. For 11 years I would have heard it as a warning. This time I heard it for what it was. A threat. I will be there tomorrow, I said. Then I ended the call. That night I placed the metal box on my dining table and opened every file inside it. Old contracts, store photographs, handwritten supplier notes, Dad's receipts, the faded original logo. I searched carefully, slowly, page by page. Near the bottom, beneath a stack of old tax forms, I found a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in my father's handwriting. Elise. For when they forget who started this. I sat there for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter. And attached to it was a document I had never seen before. A. Signed Founder Protection Agreement. Dated 2 weeks before my father died. The next evening my mother was going to gather the family, the board chair, and the people she believed she could still control. She had no idea I was going to bring my father's last decision with me. My mother's house looked exactly the way it had when I was a child. White columns, clipped hedges, brass lights beside the front door, every surface arranged to suggest that nothing bad had ever happened there. The driveway held my mother's black sedan, Marin's silver SUV, and Mr. Bradford's old Lincoln. Through the dining room window I could see the table set with Mom's wedding china. She had planned a family dinner. What she had really planned was a controlled room. I parked at the curb instead of the driveway. I carried my father's metal file box in one hand and a narrow leather folder in the other. The envelope with his handwriting stayed inside my coat pocket close enough that I could feel its edges when I breathed. Mom opened the door before I knocked. "You are late," she said. "I'm on time." Her eyes dropped to the metal box. "What is that?" "Something you told me was clutter." For a moment her face changed, then she stepped aside. The dining room had been arranged like a peace treaty. Marin sat on one side of the table in a dark green dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mr. Bradford sat near the end, looking older than he had the day before. 2 unopened bottles of wine stood on the sideboard. My mother had placed my father's framed photograph on the buffet, as if his presence would make her arguments feel more honorable. I took the empty chair across from Marin. Mom remained standing. "Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This conversation is private. We are not here to accuse anyone. We are here to protect this family and the company your father worked his entire life to build." The old sentence again. Protect the family. Protect the company. Words she used whenever she meant protect herself. Mr. Bradford cleared his throat. "Diane, perhaps Elise should speak first." Mom looked at him sharply. "She has already said quite enough." "No," I said calmly. "I have not." I placed the leather folder on the table but did not open it yet. Marin's eyes stayed on the metal box. I could see she knew what it meant now. The confidence she had worn at the board meeting was gone. In its place was fear dressed up as patience. Mom sat down slowly. "Elise, this has gone too far. You are letting Adrian Keller turn you against your own family." Adrian Keller did not create the documents dated on a day I was in Atlanta. Her mouth tightened. "I saw the copies," I continued. "I saw the voting proxy. I saw the amended shareholder agreement. I saw the witness signature." Marin looked down at the table. Mom leaned forward. "Those documents were meant to protect Hart and Vale from instability. By taking my voting rights. By making sure the company was not controlled by one person who cannot separate business from personal emotion." I almost smiled. There it was, the full version of the lie. She had not wanted to remove me because I was unqualified. She wanted to remove me because I remembered too much. I knew who had built the company, who had signed the first guarantees, who had borrowed money, who had shown up when no one else did. I was dangerous because I had receipts, but more than that, I had memory. "You did not protect the company," I said. "You tried to steal control of it." Marin finally looked up. "That is not fair." I turned toward her. "You witnessed the transfer." Her face went white. Mom reached for her hand. Marin pulled away before Mom could touch her. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting would have been. Mr. Bradford looked at my mother. "Diane, did Elise sign those documents in person?" Mom's expression did not move. She signed the paperwork. That was not my question. She approved the restructuring. That was not my question. For the first time in my life, I watched someone refuse to let my mother rearrange language until it sounded harmless. Mom's eyes narrowed. You have no idea what it takes to keep a company alive. Mr. Bradford's face changed. I was sitting in your husband's office when Elise proposed the first expansion plan. I was there when you called it reckless. I was there when she found the money anyway. Mom stared at him. He looked down at his hands, then back up. I should have said something years ago, he said. I did not. I told myself it was family business. But it was never my right to let you erase her. That was the closest thing to an apology he could give. It did not fix the years behind us. But it opened a door. I took the sealed envelope from my coat pocket and placed it on the table. My father's handwriting looked smaller than I remembered. The letters were uneven near the end, as if his hand had been tired when he wrote them. Mom saw his name and stopped breathing. Where did you get that? She asked. He gave it to me. That was private. It was addressed to me. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was Dad's letter folded around the founder protection agreement. I did not read every word aloud. Some things belonged to me, but I read the part that mattered. Diane, Dad had written, "You are strong when you are scared, but sometimes you mistake control for safety. Marin will always be loved. Elise will need to be believed. If anything happens to me, do not let the people closest to her turn her work into a favor they did for her." No one moved. Marin covered her mouth with one hand. Mom's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She had always been too proud to cry when someone else had the truth. I unfolded the agreement beside the letter. It had been prepared by Miriam Cole 2 weeks before Dad died. It confirmed that the company's founder authority, majority voting rights, and long-term operational control belonged to me. It also required any future change to those rights to be witnessed by independent counsel, approved through recorded board minutes, and delivered directly to me in writing. The final clause was the one my mother had never expected. If an attempted transfer of my voting rights was made without those safeguards, the transfer would be invalid. Any officer who knowingly presented the false transfer as legitimate could be removed from executive authority by a majority board vote. Mom stared at the paper. You had this all along, she whispered. No, I said. I found it last night. Marin's voice trembled. Mom told me it had been updated. I looked at her for a long moment. You should have asked. I know. It was the first honest thing she had said in years. Then, the doorbell rang. Mom stood quickly. Who is that? I did not answer. She walked toward the foyer, but before she reached it, the front door opened. Miriam Cole stepped inside with a worn leather briefcase hanging from one shoulder. She wore a navy coat, sensible shoes, and the expression of someone who had spent decades watching powerful people assume no one would challenge them. Mom stopped in the hallway. Miriam. Miriam said. You look well. You had no right to come into my home. I was invited. She looked at me. My mother turned back toward me, and I could see the exact moment she understood I had stopped asking permission to protect myself. Miriam entered the dining room and set her briefcase on the table. I have reviewed the original shareholder agreement, the founder protection agreement, the later internal transfer documents, and the corporate records filed with the state. Mom folded her arms. This is not a legal hearing. No, Miriam said. It is an opportunity to avoid one. The room became very still. Miriam opened her briefcase and removed a folder thicker than mine. She explained calmly and without drama that the transfer documents had not met the legal requirements in the founder protection agreement. The dates conflicted with travel records. The independent counsel acknowledgement was missing. The board minutes did not authorize the change. The state filings had never been updated. The attempted transfer had no valid force. My mother had not taken control. She had only created a paper trail proving that she tried. Marin closed her eyes. Mom looked at Mr. Bradford. You cannot let her do this. We are family. Mr. Bradford's voice was tired. That is exactly why she has to do it. Mom's face collapsed for half a second, then anger returned. You think Elise can run this company alone. You think she knows what it takes to attract investors, to protect our reputation, to keep people from seeing how broken this family really is. I stood up. I know what it takes to keep people employed, I said. I know what it takes to negotiate contracts when we cannot afford to fail. I know what it takes to build something from a warehouse with rainwater on the floor. I placed both hands on the table. And I know what it takes to stop confusing loyalty with surrender. Mom stared at me. For years, I had wanted her to understand what she had done. I wanted the perfect sentence that would make her see me clearly. But standing there, I realized something painful and freeing. She understood. She had always understood. She just believed I would stay quiet because quiet was easier for her. Miriam slid a document across the table toward my mother. This is a notice of invalid transfer and a formal request that all disputed internal documents be preserved. It also requests that you and Marin step back from executive decision-making pending a board review. Marin's eyes filled. Are you firing us? No, I said. They both looked at me. I am removing you from positions you used to hurt the company. Mom gave a small, bitter laugh. You are enjoying this. No, I said. That is the difference between us. The next day, the board met again. This time, there were no hidden folders, no rewritten titles, no chair taken while I stood outside. Miriam attended by video. Rebecca presented the financial record. Mr. Bradford read the founder protection agreement into the minutes. The board voted to invalidate the attempted transfer and suspend my mother's executive authority, while an outside audit reviewed every governance decision made during the last 18 months. Marin resigned before the vote was finished. She said she needed time away. I believed she did. My mother did not resign. She fought every word, every document, every consequence. But facts were harder to bend when they were written down. The audit found that she had used company funds to pay a consulting firm connected to one of Marin's friends. It found altered leadership materials sent to potential investors. It found emails discussing how to phase Elise out before the Keller deal closed. None of it destroyed Hart and Vale. It saved it. Adrian Keller returned 3 weeks later. He met me in the same conference room where my name had been turned face down. This time, the chair was waiting for me. The board packet listed my name first, not because I demanded it, but because it was accurate. He reviewed the new governance plan, the independent audit process, and the employee protections I had added. Then he looked at me across the table. You could have sold this company and walked away, he said. I thought about it. Why didn't you? I looked through the glass wall at the warehouse team moving product below us. Because too many people built this with me. He nodded. Keller Retail Group invested 6 months later, not because my family had a polished story, but because the company had survived the truth. We expanded carefully. We gave warehouse supervisors profit-sharing bonuses. We promoted Rebecca to Chief Financial Officer. We created an employee advisory council so no one at Hart and Vale would ever have to wonder whether their work mattered just because someone louder took credit for it. My mother stopped calling after the audit became public inside the company. Marin sent one email 3 months later. It was short. She said she was sorry. She said she had believed Mom because believing Mom was easier than admitting what she had done to me. I did not reply right away. Then I wrote back with one sentence. I hope you learn the difference between being loved and being used. That was all. I did not cut her off with anger. I did not forgive her because she was my sister. I gave her the distance she had earned. Some people call that cold. I call it finally being honest. Months later, I found myself standing outside Hart and Vale headquarters again. The same brushed metal sign, the same front steps, the same glass doors where Adrian Keller had once asked why the real founder was standing outside. This time I had come out for air after a long meeting. A young warehouse coordinator named Tessa joined me with 2 coffees and handed me one without asking how I took it. She smiled toward the building and said, You know people in there talk about you like you built this place? I looked through the doors. For years I had wanted my family to give me that sentence. But it meant more coming from someone who had watched the work. I held the warm cup between both hands and looked at my father's name above the entrance. My mother had tried to give my seat away. My sister had tried to wear my title. But a place does not belong to the person who sits closest to the table. It belongs to the person who had the courage to build it when no one else believed it could stand.